You're watching Parker Success Academy with Dr. William E. Morgan.
Hello, I'm Dr. William E. Morgan, and this is Parker Success Academy, where we explore various models of success. And today I have a very special guest, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Cnossen. Daniel, welcome to Parker Success Academy.
Thanks, Dr. Morgan. I appreciate your letting me be here, and I'm looking forward to our time together.
Well, you've got a really unique story of success, and it's a little bit of a departure from what we've done in the past, where we look at business. I would say you are provide an inspirational story of success and the overcoming lifestyle. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been through?
Sure. I grew up in Kansas, and in high school, I knew that I wanted to combine military service with going to college. I ended up at the best of the service academies, the Naval Academy.
Truly.
I wanted to be a Marine. I ended up, though, changing my mind at the end of the first year. I wanted to be selected for one of the 16 positions in my class to go to SEAL training. And these are very competitive spots, and I needed to really work on my swimming, which in addition to some other things, which I did. I eventually got to go to SEAL training, and I got through all of that in 2003, and I started deploying as a SEAL officer. And by the time 2009 came around, I was a SEAL platoon commander, so the officer in charge of an 18-man SEAL platoon. And on our subsequent deployment, I was injured in Afghanistan. This was from an IED, improvised explosive device. I was on a nighttime assault operation on foot. Bomb went off, and I woke up 10 days later in a coma, realizing that my legs were gone, amputated above the knees. And at this point, my life really changed. For 2 years, I was in the hospital world, going through surgeries, going through rehabilitation, physical therapy, and then got into the Paralympics. And then it's been a decade now of competing for Team USA on the U.S. Paralympic Nordic skiing team. That's cross-country skiing and biathlon, which is cross-country skiing with target shooting. It's been an interesting journey, to say the least.
That's a good combination for a SEAL, fitness and shooting. Have you ever crossed paths with Eric Frazier?
Yes, I have. I know Eric very well.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. He's also somebody we've worked with Parasports. And in fact, I'd like to have Eric come here. He was paralyzed, I think, from like late low thoracics down, and he has his legs, he's paralyzed. So I remember you from when I was at Walter Reed. I think it was Bethesda Naval when you arrived there, though, as well. So, but I also remember you being legendary because we had this SEAL who has this bilateral transfemoral amputation, and he's like wearing out our physical therapist. If the physical therapist come up to rehab you, and like, you want more, bring it on. And from my understanding, it was like, as soon as you woke up, as soon as you're out of the coma, you were already a Harrier pursuing the next level. That it's like, I don't know if you know this, but you inspired the 2,000 providers at Bethesda Naval Hospital with that story. Even though it has that matriculated out. We didn't all know your name, but there's a SEAL up there that is just, I lost my legs. What's next? Let's go to the next challenge in life. Do you remember those days?
I remember them in a fog of, I think, painkillers, but I very much remember wanting to get out of the ICU and get into physical therapy. And that's where I feel like the work would start happening. I'd start seeing progress. Of course, people were saying there's going to be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And at times it felt like it was more like, if I even got to take 3 steps forward, there'd be 30 steps back. But certainly I learned to apply some of the lessons I learned in SEAL training, which is when things are really daunting and overwhelming, you got to just take it one step at a time, one day at a time. And that was really my focus.
So it's some of the things you've learned, and certainly to be accepted at the Naval Academy, it's elite. To be one of the 16 of the officers that are the candidates that are midshipmen rather, who are selected to go to BUDS is a highly selective process out of the 1,200 people in your class. And then to pass BUDS, of course, and then of course go on to lead a platoon into a war area. All these, you're a high performer from way back, and high standards. But what advice would you give to people? That's he's a Navy SEAL. How can I possibly be like Dan? What advice would you give to the average person out there in regard to overcoming?
Well, I'll start by saying I was in no position to get through SEAL training when I graduated high school. No way. And a lot of the enlisted members of the SEAL community go directly from high school to Navy boot camp, and then they find themselves in buds maybe within 6, 7, 8 months of graduating high school. No way could I have done that. I needed a support network. I needed the 4 years at the Naval Academy. I was, to be quite honest, I was a little scared of the water. And so I learned a lot from my friends at the Naval Academy, and that really helped me. And as I reflect on every step of my journey, whether it was at the Naval Academy or in the SEAL teams or in the hospital setting or now as a Paralympic athlete, I have had a lot of amazing people around me, and that support network has really lifted me up. I did not do any of this alone. And that would be my advice for people that are watching and listening, is to surround yourself with great people that have positive attitude and ask questions and be a good listener. And you can really learn a lot from the people around you. I certainly have.
And of course, now you're being that mentor. I mean, you've been through hard times and come out the other side. So you're that support person for others as well. And so I'm seeing you going into the Olympics, or the Paralympics in biathlon. And you've competed for 10 years. What's your plans? Are you planning to continue to compete?
I've been on the U.S. Paralympic Nordic ski team. Nordic skiing encompasses cross-country skiing, biathlon, for 10 years. And that has involved 2 Paralympic Winter Games, 2014 in Sochi, Russia, 2018 in South Korea. And I'm planning on competing in the next one in 2022, which isn't as far away as it sounds. It's only really about a year and a half away. Not even right. Really. And so that is very much on my radar. Of course, there's a lot of unknowns and variables going on in the world right now, not only in terms of the pandemic situation, but geopolitics. And so I'm just doing what I can do myself, which is to focus on my training plan in making sure that I am prepared. A lot of uncertainty even with this ski season. Normally we compete in Europe through the winter, and there's a lot of travel involved. So a lot of that is up in the air right now.
So right now,
just focusing on what I can do.
You have like 1,000-inch target. You're looking at, like, what's the next thing to move forward? We'd love to have you come out to Parker University and check out our new Parker Fit Human Performance Center. We just built 21,000 square feet, possibly able to help you in your preparation. So what's an interesting fun fact you might want to share with everybody who may not know you, and it might be a surprise to them?
Well, I think an interesting fact about me is I grew up on a 5th generation farm in Kansas. Been in my family since the 1870s, an old stone farmhouse with a limestone barn. It's really special place for me. I try to get back as often as I can. And so that's that, I didn't grow up actually as a farmer, but it very much runs in my family. And my grandfather on my mother's side had 3 daughters, and the farming kind of ended with my grandfather. And so, but I grew up around farming and taking tractor rides and roaming around outside, and just really developed a love of being outdoors and being in nature.
And also a strong work ethic. So what would you call your definition of success?
When I think about success, when I look at my career on the Paralympic ski team, it's changed, because in the beginning I was thinking success equals medals. That is kind of how the system is structured. It's how society is oriented to help athletes who have done well, who have won, and we like winners in this country. But now I've changed, and success for me was more about, it was setting goals, long-term goals, difficult goals, but those goals weren't dependent upon outcomes. They were more dependent upon the process. So when I think about success, I think about adhering to setting goals and trying to achieve your dreams. And that involves focusing on the process, what you need to do today, what you need to do tomorrow, and then maybe having some midterm goals. And that really for me is success, adhering to that process, not necessarily based on outcome and results.
Because you can't say I'm going to win this, but you can only influence what's going on inside you. I'm reading I just completed an interesting book about the coach of the CrossFit champions. It's called Chasing Excellence, and his system is more about developing character. The system is you develop the character, and then it manifests itself in success. And I'd say you're one of those people that, from the observer looking out, you manifest success and it had to be from your character. And having seen you those early days, 2 weeks after your legs were blown off, to see your character was like already locked on to the next thing of success. What's a book that you've read recently that you would like to recommend to our audience?
Well, I try to set aside a little bit of time every day to read, especially when I'm on the road traveling or at training camps, competitions. And I like to read a mixture of literature. Sometimes I wade into philosophy, but history, politics. But I'm currently reading a book by Robert Graves, who was one of the British World War I poets. He wrote about his experience in World War I, but then he went on and wrote a really interesting 2-volume series, historical fiction on the Roman Empire, I, Claudius, and then Claudius the God. I'm currently on the second book. And I found that very fascinating. It's very interesting to read and also compare with what's going on in the world today.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth in books out there. You might be a Tolkien fan or a C.S. Lewis fan. Also, a couple authors that knew each other in the trenches of World War I, and then they told each other stories. And of course, they come out and they write these fabulous, works of fiction and also nonfiction as well. So, in your journey, what would you say is the worst moment, the low point that you've experienced?
Well, I have to say the low point was waking up in a hospital room. I have no idea where I am, how I got there, no idea how much time has passed, and was told by a medical professional to the right of my bed, after I had asked whether my legs were gone, because I was clouded up on opiates and my lower body was covered in blankets. I wasn't looking down that way, and no one was telling me anything directly. And I remember that person replying with a 1-word response: yes. And that is a really tough thing to hear, and it is a really tough thing to process. You were saying earlier that a lot of people in the hospital were inspired by my attitude, but that was an external manifestation that I put out. But I mean, I was dealing with a lot inside. Whether I showed it or not was a different story, but certainly having to work through that was the lowest point for me.
Well, we knew that. We knew that it was not, that there was darkness in there. You also met one of my interns at the time. I actually went through a fellowship, Lance Cohen. Do you remember Lance?
Oh, of course I do. And that's where we reconnected a little over a year ago in Jackson. He's doing well. He's still there. I touched base with him. He is a wonderful chiropractor and sheriff, and has moved out to Wyoming and is ranching now. Really interesting, solid character. So
I think he was working with you a little bit with his chiropractic at the hospital when you were there, getting some benefit from that. And when I was there, of course, we worked a lot in the amputee clinic, where we would adjust people, working with a physical therapist, helping those amputees get to the next level, whatever it takes to maximize and fulfill your life. But there's some people, you're a vet, I'm a vet. Some people live in that dark place. They never overcome it. What advice would you give to veterans who might have not come out of that dark place?
Well, my advice centers on 2 sources of motivation. I feel like if you're motivated, if you found something that you're really into, and hopefully that something is healthy, that really can help. And for me, in many ways, I had a lot of internal motivation, but sometimes that was lacking, in which case maybe I had to compensate by finding external sources of motivation that were outside of me. My family, wanting to represent my community, the SEAL community, the Navy, the Naval Academy, etc. Finding sources of humor and optimism outside of me that could then, in fact, maybe affect my internal dynamics. So these are all ways, I think, to stay positive. Ultimately, it sounds like a cliche, but really doing what you love is the strongest advice that I can give anybody. For me, what I loved was being outside. Really loved mountaineering and trail running. Losing your legs, that's a bit of a problem. But I found eventually there's other ways to do this. Cross-country skiing being one of them. And it's a way for me to sort of trail run in a new way and cover ground, be outside, be in nature. And so this has really done wonders for my mental psyche.
Well, it's inspirational to watch you and it's watching videos of you competing, seeing pictures of it. I've not seen you in person, but I'd love to see you compete. Of course, it's being in special warfare. You've already been through a lot of cross-country skiing. I don't know if you go up to Pico Medals. I know you've probably been to Kodiak, Alaska. I remember when I was in the military I spent 6 weeks in Alaska in the Arctic Circle. Winter warfare was miserable. Cross-country skiing in Northern California. So what was a pivotal point in your journey? We talked about your lowest point. What's the point where you kind of really pivoted and kind of, this is what this is about?
Well, I would say it happened in 2011 when I was approached by a Paralympic liaison recruiter at Walter Reed and invited to a sports camp in San Diego. And I went out there. Well, San Diego's appealing. I had lived out there for many years, and it just made sense to go on this trip. And I was interested in the Paralympics. I was recruited by the cross-country ski coach and the biathlon coach, and they asked if I knew what biathlon was, and I thought it was running and swimming.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was cross-country skiing and shooting. That sounded really appealing. That really was a pivotal point for me. And now all of a sudden I found some direction. I went out to the first on-snow camp. I was totally unprepared, but was still loving it and loving the idea of this monumental challenge and training and bettering myself and seeing progress and working towards long-term goals, being part of a team where I have a specific role and a purpose, and representing Team USA. So it's been that certainly was a pivotal point for me.
Nice. So what advice would you give a younger version of yourself, in your journey? Like if you were to go back into 2003 or 2005 and give yourself, younger self, some advice, what would it be?
Wow. Well, my advice, 2003, I was just getting out of SEAL training. I have no regrets that I chose to be a SEAL. If I would do it all over again.
Even with the injury?
Being part of that community.
Even with the injury?
Even with the injury. Now, if I had a perfectly coherent crystal ball, maybe I would have been a SEAL for a few years and then got out before the injury. That's just a kind of a joke. I at one point in my recovery was thinking to myself, honestly, if anybody up there on that hill that night had to step on this bomb, I think it makes sense that it was me because I'm wired mentally to deal with this. I didn't have a wife or a serious girlfriend or any other external commitments really. So if I did not make it through it, it would have been okay.
So you were the commander too. Yeah. Is that right?
I was platoon commander, but it was a turnover operation. And so most of my platoon was not actually on the ground in Afghanistan yet. I was shadowing and observing the platoon that we would be replacing, seeing how they were conducting business. So most of the guys up there, I didn't actually know at a fundamental level. I knew some of them just from the community being small, but they weren't actually in my platoon. It is just amazing to me that in the SEAL community and in the military at large, that people that you didn't go through your 18-month workup with, but you have this common bond, are willing to put their life on the line. And they barely even knew me. And they really did put their life on the line to get me down out of that situation, which was precarious. And they did it totally selflessly and decisively. It really is an amazing thing that for me now, I think it is what I miss most about the SEAL teams is just that connection and camaraderie. The advice I would give myself as a younger junior officer getting into the SEAL teams would be more along the lines of leadership. And it would be to acknowledge that as a leader, I'm not there to be the best friend and the hangout buddy of the guys in the platoon, because that is very tempting. And a lot of officers, and myself included, get pulled into that. We have a different kind of a familiarity within the SEAL community. It would be more about being a leader, making hard decisions if they're the right decision, if even that means it's an unpopular decision, but that's what you're there for. And I think that is probably what I struggled with the most as a junior officer.
Is being their buddy. Now, I was a corpsman with Marine Reconnaissance when I was active duty. When I got in the reserves, there was a SEAL platoon that needed a dive jump corpsman, so I was transferred to a platoon of spec warfare. So I pop up the first day, pop in a very rigid salute, and all the SEALs were laughing at me because they're like, hey, Doc, this is how it really plays. It's more like a football team where the officers are the quarterbacks, and so it was a little bit more loosey-goosey than, of course, the Marine Corps, which the originally started out with, which is, as you know, the Marine Corps is spit and polish and a lot of formality, but also the command structure is quite a bit different. So next topic is we at Parker University frequently talk about this 10x concept, something that you did that gives you a 10 times return on your investment. Is there anything you found in your life that has given you that 10x return?
Well, I would just look back on my athletic journey, and in the very beginning in 2011, when I was moving out to Colorado and I was starting the sport and I wasn't any good at it. I would say that I really trained hard. In fact, in the beginning, I probably trained a little too hard, but I was setting into motion the work ethic and the commitment to the sport that really paid off in spades later on when I got into the 2018 games, many years later. And so I can honestly say I never was doing this because of medals or because of that kind of success, but that kind of stuff, it ended up, I think, falling into place a little bit just because of what was happening much earlier when I was just a brand new athlete and had really no foreseeable success in the sport, but yet it eventually happened.
So
just
maybe
focusing on the process.
Maybe not taking as much time for downtime. You were always putting the miles in instead of
training a little bit too much in the beginning, and I was living at high altitude, very high altitude in northern Colorado, where recovery is between workouts is really important. And so I probably trained a little bit too much, but we had a longer snow year up there, which is good. But now I'm a sea level athlete. I do go to altitude at times during the training cycle, but training at sea level has some advantages and some disadvantages. Training at altitude has some advantages and disadvantages. I was training at really high altitude.
What are you talking about, like 12,000 feet?
9,000, living at 8,700 and training sometimes even up as high as 10,000 and to get the early snow.
There's a lot of hypoxia with that. Do you use hyperbaric care in your recovery?
I did use a little bit of, at that time, supplemental oxygen to facilitate high intensity workouts to try to get my heart rate a little bit higher. It's kind of like your body sort of runs out of oxygen a little bit earlier than you would normally at lower altitudes. And so it was important to try to supplement with oxygen. So we were experimenting with some things. And it was very exciting. The Olympic and Paralympic Committee has some wonderful resources and physiologists and nutritionists and a wealth of resources there, as I'm sure at Parker as well.
Well, not quite like the Olympic Center up in Colorado. So you, in addition to your success as a SEAL, as going to the Naval Academy, as a Paralympic athlete, you've also pursued a couple degrees. Can you tell us in this little college up in Massachusetts area? What college was that?
Well, I got into the university that starts with an H, Harvard. The Kennedy School of Government seemed like a really logical place. I was getting out of the Navy. It was 2015. I had applied to the Kennedy School based on some recommendations from friends in the SEAL teams officers who had gone to the Kennedy School. And the course curriculum is just right up my line with a lot of national security classes, but there's many classes in areas that I didn't have as much exposure to while I was in the military. It was a great program, a mid-career program. So only 1 year. I highly recommend it to people. And using the GI Bill. And so for me at the time, I knew that my athletic career was not over, wondering whether I could train and balance school and the demands of training. I found out that I could. I'm close enough to ski country. There's actually a ski track 15 minutes away in the winter where they can make snow. And so it just all worked out for me. I was in a good mind-body balance. The somewhat pressures of academics were taking the pressure off competition and any results. And then vice versa, the training and preparation physically was taking the pressure off the classroom.
So I see your door behind you is open. So you must be having a pleasant day there in Boston. Although
it is nice here. It's a nice day.
But most people don't realize that amputees run very hot because your core makes the energy increases your temperature. Your extremities you dissipate. So if you lose your legs, each one of those is 18% of your ability to dissipate heat. So amputees normally run a little hot. So that might be why you chose your winter sport for your sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe other people would be wearing a longer sleeve shirt right now, but I feel fine in a t-shirt.
So as we bring to the end of this, I've picked up a few things along what I've heard from you is one is having these goals, of course, not letting these big, disappointments in life stop you in your journey, but as a leader, to be a leader. Don't be somebody's buddy, because a leader's required to make hard decisions. And I think it's epitomized by what you said about, I'm glad I was the one who stepped on the IED. That's big. As a leader, there's certain things happen that it's like, it happens to me, and it's like, I'm glad that happened to me and not to somebody else. A true leader is a sacrificial leader. And what you just said shows you embodied that you would rather be the person who took that bomb than to have a younger enlisted person or somebody else do it. Also, you see that you're embodied that the story's not over yet. For some people, and I've worked with other vets that, they've had amputees and they've crawled into a bottle of Jack Daniels, and frankly, some of my friends have not come out yet. So there's a point of having those goals in life and making sure your story has more to it than just that thing that defines you. I can tell you're not defined by your injuries. Would you like to take a moment, just leave the audience with some parting advice or something you'd like to leave about your journey and what you've learned in life?
Well, thank you. That's a great synopsis. And I think when I talk about goal setting, how important that has been for me, I wasn't doing formal goal setting where I had to write down in the hospital, my goal is to run, because I just held it within, and it was very innate, and the goal sustained me through a lot of difficult times in the early days in the ICU, through surgeries and setbacks. But that goal of running, it probably presupposed walking. And then before that, getting out of the bed and getting into a wheelchair. And so there were many steps along the way. And if I thought about how long of a journey and a road it was going to be to get to the point where I'm finally running, it probably would have discouraged me. It's a lot of work. It ended up taking about 2 years of solid physical therapy. So I had to come up with ways of, not diminishing the goal itself, but to diminishing the time span, to shrinking it, so to speak, down to midterm goals and short-term goals. And sometimes when things are really bad, just doing what you need to do to get through the next 5 minutes or the next minute when I was really having a lot of nerve pain. So it's that goal setting, but ability to kind of compress and do what it takes to get through the moment or through a difficult situation. I certainly learned that in SEAL training in Hell Week, and that has applied itself pretty well through my injury and getting through difficult situations.
And I can imagine going through Hell Week and through BUDS, where the phrase, the only easy day was yesterday is your motto, that you're just looking at the next thing, because if you saw all the obstacles ahead, it's just overwhelming for you. And that's the way in life. If we were to see the whole, what God had in store for us our entire life, it would be daunting to us. Well, we'd like to thank you, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Cnossen, for coming here today, spending time with us. We thank you, for the audience, for joining us at the Parker Success Academy, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Daniel, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. It's a great honor to be here with you today.
Thanks for watching another episode of Parker Success Academy with Dr. William E. Morgan.